I was looking at the app I used to find free stuff when I stumbled across the ad for this one. It was part of a huge bundle they were giving away, but I'll start with the cultivator for right now. I of course did not ask them why they were giving it away, I was just happy to have the opportunity. But what I find out about this cultivator had me wondering, why did they give it away, because as you're about to see, it simply doesn't make sense. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this troy-bilt cultivator, and the problem is that we don't know anything about it, but with most 2-cycle equipment that's being given away, it probably won't start. They were also giving away the electric starter for it too, which is a huge bonus, especially when it comes to selling it, but we're not going to use it until later on when we get it working again. Now, I'm going to try and repair this cultivator, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. The first thing that I'm going to do before we start on the project is document as many of the stickers as we can find. That way, when we have to order the parts, we'll have the information we need to get the right ones. I'm also going to do something that some don't think is necessary, which is to put fuel into the tank and then try and start it. In my opinion, we might as well give it a try. That way we'll get to see what's wrong with it before putting the time into it. Now, because of how new the fuel tank looks, we might just get lucky with this one, and that's because it's telling us just how little this machine was used. The same can be said about the fuel lines. They look and feel practically brand new, which doesn't happen all that often. But the first real test is whether or not the purge bulb is able to pull fuel from the tank, and luckily it passed that test. Well, I was not expecting that to happen. After several pulls, it started, idled, albeit a little bit fast, but at least it didn't stop. It revved up just fine and sounded great too, so why did they give it away? Now, the engine was a bit loose on the shaft, but that's not a good reason to put it on the curb. And a bit of tightening on the screws will fix that with little to no effort. It also turns out that the wing nut that holds the cover on is only glued to the bolt, and unfortunately, it decided to take off. So just be careful if you have one of these and don't over tighten it, because this will happen to you too. I'm also going to give this cultivator a quick spray and rinse because quite honestly, it's kind of gross in a couple of spots. Now, if yours is not this bad, then you won't need to do this kind of cleaning. Now, even though it started and ran and everything seemed to be good, the fact that the engine was not running at idle speed might mean there's a problem with it at lower speeds. And the previous owner adjusted the engine speed so it didn't have to idle, therefore bypassing the problem. So I do plan on starting the engine again and testing how it runs at lower speeds. But with most small 4-cycle engines like this one, we need to inspect the valve clearances as part of good maintenance. And after a good rinsing, I'd recommend letting it dry off the best it can before you start working on it. However, if you're in a time crunch, just speed up the drying process by using compressed air or a leaf blower. So it's been sitting in the sun for several hours, and I did reposition it a couple times to allow the water to escape areas where it might have been trapped at. Now, I did the best I could, but we might still end up having to clean other areas that we couldn't get to. Now, I don't plan on replacing the fuel lines, and that's because they're still in great condition, but I might change my mind by the end of the repair. Now, you don't need to do this, but I'm going to fold the handlebar under the machine. Doing that will get them out of the way, and I can get in better positions with my camera to film. I was also not planning on replacing the purge bulb, but I did want to show you how to check which port was the return port. However, as I was pressing on the bulb, it decided to break on camera, so I guess it was insisting to be replaced. Now, when ordering a new bulb, be very careful and make sure you order the right size, as these come in 2 different sizes. This one happens to be the smaller one. Now, since I don't plan on taking the carb off, I'm going to replace the bulb with it attached to the engine. The only thing you have to watch out for is the carb coming apart, so I'd recommend that you position the carb with the bulb facing upwards. This way, gravity will help to keep the carb from coming apart as you change the bulb, otherwise have someone help you. I will let you know that yes, I am going to use my drill to help put the screws back onto the carb. However, on something like this, I would like to leave the finishing torque to be applied by hand. You can use whatever method you want, just make sure the screws are snug so there's not a leak. Now, if your purge bulb happens to break while you're using the machine, don't worry, the bulb is there only to help make starting a cold engine easier. You can still start it, but it'll be a lot trickier to start and it'll be easy to flood the engine. Once the bulb is back on, press it a couple times just to make sure it still works. So here's the part that gets overlooked so often on these 4-cycle engines, which is checking the valve clearances. After a lot of heat cycles, the clearances have a tendency to change over time. And if the clearances are out of tolerance, they could cause the engine to be tough to start when it's cold or even when it's hot. So we're also going to check on the screen in the outlet of the muffler to make sure it's not clogged with carbon. Also, be very aware where the fasteners go because some will be for metal while others will be for plastic. And if you do get them mixed up, you could do some serious damage to the threads, which is not ideal. Once the rear cover was removed, turns out there's quite a lot of dirt under the cover, not to mention on the back of the engine. And even though it won't hurt anything, I'm going to give it a quick spray and rinse just so I don't have to worry about it later on. So next, we're going to move on to the valve cover, and this is when I realized that in its 10 years out of the box, the valves have never been checked. Most of the work on these never torqued this bolt down this much, except for when it's been done by the factory. So I started off using a Torx bit, but it was so tight that I needed more leverage on it. Now, even though I'm very certain that it doesn't have 10 years of time on the engine, it was still used enough to have affected the valve clearances. The other clue that tells me the valve cover has never been taken off before is that the O-ring is stuck to the valve cover. It won't hurt the O-ring to come up with the cover, but I'd rather not have to deal with putting it back on. Now, luckily for us, this engine can be rotated by using the adapter for the electric starter. But to make it even easier to rotate, I'd recommend taking out the spark plug, but you don't have to do this if you don't want to. Now, while I have the spark plug out of the engine, this would be a great time to check the gap on it. So I like to set my spark plug gap to 25 thousandths of an inch, but if you think it should be a different value, that's fine too. Now, there is quite a bit of carbon on the spark plug, but it's not the worst I've seen considering it's 10 years old. Next, we'll rotate the engine so that one of the rocker arms is all the way down, while the other one is all the way up. We'll then check the clearance on the arm that's all the way up, and to do that, I'll be using my 5 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge. I'll then slide my feeler into the clearance and see how it fits, and on this one, it's much too loose. That means the clearance here is a lot more than 5 thousandths of an inch, so to fix it, I'll turn the adjusting nut until the feeler gauge almost gets stuck. Once I'm satisfied with how the feeler moves in the clearance, I'll then rotate the engine again. That'll swap the position of the rocker arms and then repeat the process for the arm that's loose. I will let you know that it's very important to test run a machine through a full use and also start and stop it when the engine is hot. This will let you know if there might be something wrong with the valve clearances, but it's not a guarantee though. The reason why is because the engine will still start and run with the clearances being out of tolerance, and relying only on a test run to figure that out will only show when it's severely out of spec and not when it's only slightly out of spec. Now, if you choose to not inspect the valve clearances because the engine starts like it should, then I can respect your choice because it's based on what you're seeing and not by what I think you should do. Now, if there's a lot of carbon buildup on your spark plug, then you can either try and clean it with a propane torch or you can just replace it. But you do have to wonder why there's a lot of carbon buildup on it in the first place, and unfortunately, the answer most times is that the engine is burning oil. Now, besides the spark plug being covered in carbon, the other place where carbon would build up is the spark arrestor screen. If the screen is covered in carbon, it means on a 4-cycle engine that it's burning its own oil. But if it is minimal, then the carbon that's on it and the spark plug is normal and is just built up over time. Now, this larger bolt is one of the ones that holds the muffler to the engine, so taking it off will be a real pain. So instead, I'll just swing the screen out to inspect it, but it's really difficult to tell what it looks like. So to make it easier, I'm going to put my flashlight behind the screen so we can see how much carbon buildup is on it. And to my surprise, it actually looks great, which means this engine is not burning oil and it tells us that the engine is quite healthy too. We'll then reinstall the screen and the fasteners for the muffler's outlet. Now, some would tell me to throw away the screen, but I like the idea of not having sparks come out of the muffler. Of course, you're welcome to do whatever you want with your spark arrestor screen, and I'll do the same. And since we pretty much got everything fixed that we want, it's time to reassemble the engine and get ready for a test run. Now, I'm not going to change the oil just yet, and that's because I want to get the engine good and hot to help get out all the contaminants. So instead of using the pull rope this time, I'm going to use the electric starter mainly because I want to make sure that it works. Simply plug it into the wall, insert it to the back, and make sure that it locks in place, and then hit the button. So it stopped, but I'm not too worried about it just yet. We'll start it back up and try that again. So it was lightly smoking for a bit there, but it soon went away. So for the most part, it started and ran very well. However, I do think I should at least go through the carb just to make sure it's in good shape. But I might just end up wasting my time, so I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. Now, as for this cultivator, I'm going to hold on to it through the winter and then sell it in spring unless I can find a coworker who needs it more than I do. But to be honest, I'd really like to put this engine on a bicycle instead so that it's motorized. However, I'm not really sure it's legal to ride around my area. So why would they give this working cultivator away? If I had to guess, I'd say they didn't need it anymore and they just needed to clear out the shed. But if you think you have a better idea, well, I'd certainly like to hear it. So my question is, do you think I should go through the carb or leave it as is? I'm not sure why it shut off earlier during the test run, and going through the carb might help figure it out.
Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.